Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is Knights Templar, Masonic from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey. Knights Templar, Masonic. The connection of the Knights Templar with the Freemasons may much more plausibly be traced than that of the Knights of Malta. Yet, unfortunately, the sources from which information is to be derived are for the most part traditionary. Authentic dates and documents are wanting. Tradition has always been inclined to trace the connection to an early period, and to give to the Templar system of secret reception a Masonic character derived from their association during the Crusades with the mystical society of the assassins in Syria. Laurie, or Sir David Brewster, the real author of the work which bears Laurie's name, embodies the tradition in this form. Almost all the secret associations of the ancients either flourished or originated in Syria and the adjacent countries. It was here that the Dionysian artists, the Essenes, and the Chalcidians arose. From this country also came several members of that trading association of Masons which appeared in Europe during the Dark Ages, and we are assured that notwithstanding the unfavorable condition of that province, there exists at this day on Mount Libanus one of these Syriac fraternities. As the Order of the Templars, therefore, was originally formed in Syria and existed there for a considerable time, it would be no improbable supposition that they received their Masonic knowledge from the lodges in that quarter. But we are fortunately, in this case, not left to conjecture, for we are expressly informed by a foreign author, Adler de Drusis, who was well acquainted with the history and customs of Syria, that the Knights Templar were actually members of the Syriac fraternities. Even if this hypothesis were true, although it might probably suggest the origin of the secret reception of the Templars, it would not explain the connection of the modern Templars with the Freemasons, because there is no evidence that these Syriac fraternities were Masonic. There are 4 sources from which the Masonic Templars are said to have derived their existence, making therefore as many different divisions of the order. 1. The Templars who claim John Mark L'arminius as the successor of James de Molay. 2. Those who recognize Peter d'Aumont as the successor of de Molay. 3. Those who derive their Templarism from the Count Beaujeu, the nephew of Molay. 4. Those who claim an independent origin and repudiate alike the authority of L'Arminius, of Aumont, and of Beaujeu. From the first-class spring, the Templars of France, who profess to have continued the order by authority of a charter given by de Molay to L'Arminius. This body of Templars designate themselves as the Order of the Temple. Its seat is in Paris. The Duke of Sussex received from it the degree and the authority to establish a grand conclave in England. He did so, and convened that body once, but only once. During the remaining years of his life, Templarism had no activity in England, as he discountenanced all Christian and chivalric Masonry. See Temple Order of the... The second division of Templars is that which is founded on the theory that Peter d'Aumont fled with several knights into Scotland and there united with the Freemasons. This legend is intimately connected with Ramsay's tradition that Freemasonry sprang from Templarism and that all Freemasons are Knights Templar. The chapter of Clermont adopted this theory and in establishing their high degrees asserted that they were derived from these Templars of Scotland. The Baron Hund carried the theory into Germany and on it established his right of strict observance, which was a Templar system. Hence, the Templars of Germany must be classed under the head of the followers of Aumont. See strict observance. The third division is that which asserts that the Count Beaujeu, a nephew of the last Grand Master de Molay and a member of the Order of Knights of Christ, the name assumed by the Templars of Portugal, had received authority from that order to disseminate the degree. He is said to have carried the degree and its ritual into Sweden, where he incorporated it with Freemasonry. The story is too that Beaujeu collected his uncle's ashes and interred them in Stockholm, where a monument was erected to his memory. Hence, the Swedish Templar Masons claim their descent from Beaujeu, and the Swedish rite is through this source a Templar system. Of the last class, or the Templars who recognized the authority of neither of the leaders who have been mentioned, there were 2 subdivisions, the Scotch and the English, for it is only in Scotland and England that this independent Templarism found a foothold. It was only in Scotland that the Templars endured no persecution. Long after the dissolution of the order in every other country of Europe, the Scottish preceptories continued to exist, and the knights lived undisturbed. One portion of the Scottish Templars entered the army of Robert Bruce, and after the Battle of Bannockburn were merged in the Royal Order of Scotland, then established by him. See Royal Order of Scotland. Another portion of the Scottish Templars united with the Knights Hospitallers of St. John. They lived amicably in the same houses and continued to do so until the Reformation. At this time, many of them embraced Protestantism. Some of them united with the Freemasons and established the ancient lodge at Stirling, where they conferred the degrees of Knight of the Sepulchre, Knight of Malta, and Knights Templar. It is to this division that we are to trace the Masonic Templars of Scotland. The Roman Catholic knights remaining in the order placed themselves under David Seaton. Lord Dundee afterward became their Grand Master. Charles Edward, the Young Pretender, is said to have been admitted into the order at Holyrood House, Edinburgh, on September 24, 1745, and made the Grand Master. He is also said, but without any proof, to have established the Chapter of Arras and the High Degrees. To this branch, I think there can be but little doubt that we are to attribute the Templar system of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite as developed in its degree of Kadosh. The English Masonic Templars are most probably derived from that body called the Baldwin Encampment, or from some one of the four coordinate encampments of London, Bath, York, and Salisbury, which it is claimed were formed by the members of the Preceptory which had long existed at Bristol, and who, on the dissolution of their order, are supposed to have united with the Masonic fraternity. The Baldwin Encampment claims to have existed from time immemorial, an indefinite period, but we can trace it back far enough to give it a priority over all other English encampments. From this division of the Templars, repudiating all connection with L'Armenius, with Aumont, or any other of the self-constituted leaders, but tracing its origin to the independent action of knights who fled for security and for perpetuity into the body of Masonry, we may be held justly entitled to derive the Templars of the United States. Of this brief statement, we may make the following summary. 1. From L'Armenius came the French Templars. 2. From Aumont, the German Templars of strict observance. 3. From Beaujeu, the Swedish Templars of the Rite of Zinzendorf. 4. From the Protestant Templars of Scotland and the ancient Lodge of Stirling, the Scotch Templars. 5. From Prince Charles Edward and his adherents, the Templars of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. 6. From the Baldwin Encampment and its coordinates, the Old English and the American Templars. The government of Masonic Knights Templar in the United States is vested first in commanderies, which confer the Red Cross and Templar degrees and instruct in the secrets of Malta. The usual expression that a candidate after being made a Knights Templar is also created a Knight of Malta involves an absurdity. No man being a Knights Templar could, by the original statutes, be a member of any other order. And it is to be regretted that the wise provision of the Grand Encampment in 1856, which struck the degree of Malta from the ritual of the commanderies, should have been in 1862 unwisely repealed. The secrets in which the candidate is instructed are the modern inventions of the Masonic Knights of Malta. The original order had no secrets. Commanderies are under the control of grand commanderies in states in which those bodies exist. Where they do not, the warrants are derived directly from the Grand Encampment. The supreme authority of the order is exercised by the Grand Encampment of the United States, which meets triennially. The presiding officer is a Grand Master. The costume of the Knights Templar of the United States is of two kinds. First, the original uniform, which was in general use until the year 1859, and is still used by commanderies which were in existence before that time. It is thus described: the suit is black, with black gloves. A black velvet sash, trimmed with silver lace, crosses the body from the left shoulder to right hip, having at its end a cross-hilted dagger, a black rose on the left shoulder, and a Maltese cross at the end. Where the sash crosses the left breast is a 9-pointed star in silver, with a cross and serpent of gold in the center, within a circle, around which are the words, "In hoc signo vinces." The apron is of black velvet in triangular form to represent the delta and edged with silver lace. On its flap is placed a triangle of silver perforated with 12 holes, with a cross and serpent in the center. On the center of the apron are a skull and crossbones, between 3 stars of 7 points, having a red cross in the center of each. The belt is black, to which is attached a cross-hilted sword. The caps vary in form and decoration in different encampments. The standard is black, bearing a 9-pointed cross of silver, having in its center a circle of green, with the cross and serpent in gold, and the motto around In hoc signo vinces. In 1859, the Grand Encampment enacted a statute providing that all commanderies, which might be thereafter chartered, should provide a new costume of an entirely different kind, which should also be adopted by the old commanderies whenever they should change their uniform. This new costume was further altered in 1862 and is now of the following description, as detailed in the statute. Full dress: black frock coat, black pantaloons, scarf, sword, belt, shoulder straps, gauntlets and chapeau with appropriate trimmings. Fatigue dress: same as full dress except for chapeau, a black cloth cap, navy form with appropriate cross in front, and for gauntlets, white gloves. Scarf, 5 inches wide in the whole of white, bordered with black 1 inch on either side, a strip of navy lace 1/4 of an inch wide at the inner edge of the black. On the front center of the scarf, a metal star of 9 points, in allusion to the 9 founders of the Temple Order, enclosing the Passion Cross, surrounded by the Latin motto, In hoc signo vinces. The star to be 3 3/4 inches in diameter. The scarf to be worn from the right shoulder to the left hip, with the ends extending 6 inches below the point of intersection. Chapeau: the military chapeau trimmed with black binding, 1 white and 2 black plumes, and appropriate cross on the left side. Gauntlets of buff leather, the flap to extend 4 inches upward from the wrist and to have the appropriate cross embroidered in gold on the proper colored velvet 2 inches in length. Sword, 34 to 40 inches inclusive of scabbard, helmet head, cross handle and metal scabbard. Belt, red enameled or patent leather 2 inches wide, fastened round the body with buckle or clasp. From what has been said, it will appear that there are 2 modes of dress or costume in use among the Templars of the United States. One, the old or black uniform, which was adopted at the first organization of the order in this country, and which is still used by the old commanderies which were in existence previous to the year 1859. And the new or white uniform, which was adopted by the Grand Encampment in that year, and which has been prescribed for all commanderies chartered since that year. This difference of costume has recently been the occasion of much discussion in the order. In 1872, Sir J.Q.A. Fellows, the Grand Master, thinking that it was his duty to enforce a uniform dress in the order, issued his decree requiring all the commanderies in the United States, which were then using the black uniform, to abandon it and to adopt the white uniform, which had been originally ordered in 1859 and subsequently amended in 1862. Much opposition has been manifested to this order in the commanderies and grand commanderies where the black costume was in use. The Grand Master's interpretation of the statute of the Grand Encampment has been doubted or denied, and the order has been virtually disobeyed by most, if not by all of them. The question has assumed great importance in consequence of the feeling that has been created and is therefore worthy of discussion. Dr. Mackey's views were against the correctness of the Grand Master's interpretation of the law, and so were those of the living past Grand Masters of the Order. It is, however, but fair to say that some distinguished Templars have been of a different opinion. The following views advanced by Dr. Mackey in the National Freemason in December 1872 express what he thought was the true condition of the question. Previous to the year 1859, the costume of the Knights Templar of this country was determined only by a traditional rule and consisted of a black dress, with the richly decorated baldric and apron, the latter intended to show the connection which existed between the order and ancient craft masonry. In 1856 at Hartford, a new constitution was proposed and adopted, with the exception of the part that referred to costume. Sir Knight Mackey from the Committee on the Constitution made a report on the subject of dress as a part of the Constitution. But the consideration of this report was postponed until the next triennial meeting. The changes in costume proposed by the committee were not very great. The baldric and the essential apron were preserved, and a white tunic, not hitherto used, was recommended. At the session of 1859 at Chicago, The subject of dress was alluded to by the Grand Master in his address, and his remarks, together with the report of the committee made in 1856, were referred to a special committee of 7, of which the Grand Master was chairman, and Sir Knights Doyle, Pike, Simons, Mackey, Morris, and French were the members. This committee reported a uniform which made material differences in the dress theretofore worn, and especially by the rejection of the apron and the introduction of a white tunic and a white cloak. These last were favorite notions of Grandmaster Hubbard, and they were adopted by the committee mainly in deference to his high authority. The proposed measure met at first with serious opposition, partly on account of the rejection of the apron, which many Templars then held, as they do now, to be an essential feature of Masonic Templarism, and a tangible record of the union at a specific period in history of the two orders, but mainly perhaps on account of the very heavy expense and inconvenience which would devolve on the old commanderies if they were required at once to throw aside their old dress and provide a new one. This opposition was only quelled by the agreement on a compromise by which the old commanderies were to be exempted from the operation of the law. The regulations for the new costume were then passed, and the compromise immediately after adopted in the words of the following resolution, which was proposed by Sir Knight Doyle, who was one of the committee. Resolved that the costume this day adopted by the Grand Encampment be, and the same is hereby ordered to be worn by all commanderies chartered at this communication, or that shall hereafter be established in this jurisdiction, and by all commanderies heretofore existing, whenever they shall procure a new costume. And all state grand commanderies were directed to enforce it in all subordinates that may hereafter be chartered in their respective jurisdictions. This was a compromise, nothing more or less, and so understood at the time. The old commanderies were then in the majority and would not have consented to any change involving so much expenditure unless they had been relieved from the burden themselves. But the white tunic and cloak were never popular with the knights, who had been required by the regulations of 1859 to wear them. In consequence of this, at the session in 1862, on motion of Sir Knight Bailey, the subject matter of costume and the resolution relating thereto were referred to a select committee of 5. This committee made a report in which they proposed a uniform. The record says that the report was agreed to and the uniform was adopted. But there are some points in this report that are worthy of notice. In the first place, not a word is said about the compromise resolution adopted in 1859, although it was referred to the committee. That resolution was not repealed by any action taken at the session of 1862 and still must remain in force. It secured to the old commanderies the right to wear the old black costume, a right which could not be taken from them except by a repeal of the resolution conferring the right. Nothing need be said of the manifest injustice of repealing a resolution granted by the friends of a measure to its opponents to remove their opposition. In 1859, the promise was made to the old commanderies that if they would agree to a certain uniform to be prescribed for new commanderies, their own old traditional costume should never be interfered with. Might could, it is true, repeal this compromise, but right would for that purpose have to be sacrificed. But the fact is that the sense of right in the Grand Encampment prevented such an act of discourtesy, not to put too fine a point upon it. And no one can find in the proceedings of the Grand Encampment any act which repeals the compromise resolution of 1859. And this has been the opinion and the decision of all the Grand Masters who have wielded the baculus of office, except the present one. But in the second place, the report of 1862 shows clearly that the object of the committee was to recommend a change in the uniform that had been adopted for new commanderies in 1859, and which had become objectionable on account of the tunic and cloak, and that they did not intend to refer at all to the old dress of the old commanderies. In the report, the committee say, "The objections advanced to the costume adopted at the last triennial conclave of this grand body our want of adaptation to the requirements of our modern Templars, its liability to injury and its expensiveness." Now, who advanced these objections? Clearly not the old commanderies. They were well satisfied with the mode of dress which they had received from their fathers, and which was dear to them for its solemn beauty and its traditional associations, and the right to wear which had been secured to them in 1859, with the understanding that if they ever desired, of their own accord, to lay it aside, they would then adopt, in its stead, the regulation dress of the Grand Encampment. But this was to be for their own free action. It was very evident that the old commanderies had never complained that the tunics and cloaks were from their material expensive and from their color liable to injury. The old commanderies did not use these expensive and easily soiled garments. It was the new commanderies that had made the objection, and for them the legislation of 1862 was undertaken. Dr. Mackey held, therefore, that the Compromise Resolution of 1859 still remains in force, that even if the Grand Encampment had the right to repeal it, which he did not admit, it never has enacted any such repeal, that the old commanderies have the right to wear the old black uniform, and that the legislation of 1862 was intended only to affect the new commanderies, which had been established since the year 1859, when the first dress regulation was adopted. It would scarcely be proper to close this article on Masonic Templarism without some reference to a philological controversy which has recently arisen among the members of the order in the United States in reference to the question whether the proper title in the plural is Knights Templars or Knights Templar. This subject was first brought to the attention of the order by the introduction in the session of the Grand Encampment in 1871 of the following resolutions by Sir Knight Charles F. Stansbury of Washington City. Resolved, that the proper title of the Templar Order is Knights Templars, and not Knights Templar as now commonly used under the sanction of the example of this Grand Encampment. Resolved, that the use of the term Knights Templar is an innovation in violation of historic truth, literary usage, and the philology and grammar of the English language. This report was referred to a committee who reported that this Grand Encampment has no authority to determine questions of historic truth, literary usage, and the philology and grammar of the English language, and they asked to be discharged from the further consideration of the subject. This report is not very creditable to the committee and puts a very low estimate on the character of the Grand Encampment. Certainly it is the duty of every body of men to inquire whether the documents issued under their name are in violation of these principles, and if so, to correct the error. If a layman habitually writes bad English, it shows that he is illiterate, and the committee should have sought to preserve the Grand Encampment from a similar charge. It should have investigated the subject, which to scholars is of more importance than they seem to consider it. They should have defended the Grand Encampment in the use of the term, or have recommended its abandonment. Moreover, the Grand Recorder reports that on examination he finds that the title Knights Templars was always used until 1856, when it is changed to Knights Templar. And the committee should have inquired by whose authority the change was made. But having failed to grapple with the question of good English, the craft afterward took the subject up, and a long discussion ensued in the different Masonic journals, resulting at last in the expression by the best scholars of the order of the opinion that Knights Templars was correct because it was in accordance with the rules of good English and in unexceptional agreement with the usage of all literary men who have written on the subject. Brother Stansbury, in an article on this question which he published in Mackey's National Freemason, has almost exhausted the subject of authority and grammatical usage. He says that it is an innovation in violation of historic truth is proved by reference to all historical authorities. I have made diligent researches in the Congressional Library and have invoked the aid of all my friends who were likely to be able to assist me in such an investigation, and so far from finding any conflict of authority on the question, I have never been able to discover a single historical authority in favor of any other title than Knights Templars. I refer to the following list of authorities: Encyclopedia Britannica, Encyclopedia Americana, Chambers' Encyclopedia, London Encyclopedia, Encyclopedia Metropolitana, Penny Cyclopedia, Cottage Cyclopedia, Rees's Cyclopedia, Wade's British Chronology, Blair's Chronological Tables, Chambers' Miscellany Crusades, Chambers' Book of Days, Addison's Knights Templars, Pantologia, Boutell's Heraldry, Hallam's Middle Ages, Lingard's History of England, Glossographia Anglicana Nova, 1707, Blackstone's Commentaries, Volume 1, page 406, Appleton's Cyclopedia of Biography, Molai, Townsend's Calendar of Knights, London, 1828. Mosheim's Ecclesiastical History, 1832, Volume 2, page 481. Dugdale's Monastic and Anglicanum, Volume 4, page 813. Hayden's Dictionary of Dates. Beckton's Dictionary of Universal Information. Burns' Sketch of the History of the Knights Templars. Laurie's History of Freemasonry. Taffy's History of Knights of Malta. London Freemasons Magazine. Sutherland's Achievements of Knights of Malta. Clark's History of Knighthood. Ashmole's History of the Order of the Garter. Turner's England in the Middle Ages. Brander's Encyclopedia. Tanner's Notitia Monastica. 1744, pages 307 through 310. These will perhaps suffice to show what, in the opinion of historical authorities, is the proper title of the order. In all of them, the term Knights Templars is the only one employed. They might perhaps be sufficient also on the question of literary usage, but on that point I refer in addition to the following. London Quarterly Review, 1829, page 608, article, History of the Knights Templars. Edinburgh Review, October 1806, page 196. Review of Memrenoir's work, Les Templiers. Eclectic Review, 1842, page 189. Review of the History of the Knights Templars, the Temple Church, and the Temple by Chas. G. Addison. The running title is History of the Knights Templars. Retrospective Review, 1821, Volume 4, page 250. Review of the History of the Templars by Nicholas Gualterius. Amsterdam, 1703. The running title is History of the Knights Templars. In Dr. Mackey's various Masonic works, both titles are occasionally used, but that fact is fully explained in the letter from that distinguished Masonic authority, with which I shall conclude this article. On the philological and grammatical question, it mainly turns on the inquiry whether the word Templar is a noun or an adjective. I think it may be safely asserted that every dictionary of the English language in which the word occurs gives it as a noun and as a noun only. This is certainly the fact as to Johnson's Dictionary, Webster's Dictionary, Cole's Dictionary, Crabb's Dictionary, Technological, Imperial Dictionary, Craig's Dictionary, Universal, and Worcester's Dictionary. If then the word Templar is a noun, we have in the combination Knights Templar, two nouns referring to the same person, one of which is in the plural and the other in the singular. The well-known rule of apposition, which prevails in almost, if not quite all languages, requires nouns under these circumstances to agree in number and case. This is, in fact, a principle of general grammar, founded in common sense. The combination Knights Templar is therefore false in grammar, if the word Templar is a noun. But some may say that it is a noun used as an adjective, a qualifying noun, a very common usage in the English tongue. If this were so, the combination Knights Templar would still be entirely out of harmony with the usage of the language in regard to qualifying nouns, the invariable practice being to place the adjective noun before the noun which it qualifies. A few familiar examples will show this. Take the following: mansion house, birdcage, sea fog, dog days, mousetrap, devilfish, inkstand, and beer cask. In every case, the generic word follows the qualifying noun. But if we even went to the length of admitting the word Templar to be an adjective, the combination Knights Templar would still be contrary to the genius of the language, which, except in rare cases, places the adjective before the noun which it qualifies. In poetry and in some technical terms of foreign origin, the opposite practice prevails. The analogy of the usage in reference to the designations of other orders of knighthood is also against the use of Knights Templar. We have Knights Commanders, Knights Bachelors, Knights Bannerets, Knights Baronets, and Knights Hospitallers. Against all this, the only thing that can be pleaded is the present usage of the Grand Encampment of the United States and of some commanderies which have followed in its wake. The propriety of this usage is the very question at issue, and it would be curious reasoning indeed that would cite the fact of the usage in proof of its propriety. If the Templars of today are the successors of de Molay and Hugh de Payens, the preservation and restoration of the correct title of the order cannot be a matter of indifference to them. In reference to the varying use of the two expressions in the author's Lexicon of Freemasonry, I find, on reference to that work, that in the first part I used the phrase Knights Templars, and that in the latter part I made a change of the expression to Knights Templar. I am unable now to say from memory what led me to make the change, but I suppose that I must have used the first form in compliance with the general usage of writers, and that I subsequently made the alteration in deference to the action of the Grand Encampment of the United States, which body about that time adopted the expression Knights Templar. And I must have made this alteration without any reference to the philological merits of the question. In coming to the consideration of the question, it appears that it must be examined in two ways, grammatically and traditionally. In other words, we must inquire first which of these two expressions better accords with the rules of English grammar, and secondly, which of them has the support and authority of the best English writers. 1. If we examine the subject grammatically, we shall find that its proper decision depends simply on the question, is Templar a noun or an adjective? If it is an adjective, then Knights Templar is correct, because adjectives in English have no plural form. It would, however, be an awkward and unusual phraseology because it is the almost invariable rule of the English language that the adjective should precede and not follow the substantive which it qualifies. But if Templar is a substantive or noun, then clearly Knights Templar is an ungrammatical phrase because Templar would then be in apposition with Knights and should be in the same regiment, that is to say, two nouns coming together and referring to the same person or thing being thus said to be in apposition must agree in number and case. Thus we say King George or Duke William when King and George and Duke and William are in apposition and in the singular. But speaking of Thackeray's four Georges and intending to designate who they were by an explanatory noun in apposition, we should put both nouns in the plural and say the four Georges, kings of England. So when we wish to designate a simple knight, who is not only a knight, but also belongs to that branch of the order which is known as Templars, we should call him a Knight Templar. And if there be two or more of these Templars, we should call them Knights Templars, just as we say Knight Hospitaller and Knights Hospitallers. Now there is abundant evidence in the best works on the subject of the use of the word Templar as a substantive and none of its use as an adjective. It would be tedious to cite authorities, but a reference to our best English writers will show the constant employment of Templar as a substantive only. The analogy of the Latin and French languages supports this view, for Templarius is a noun in Latin, as Templier is in French. 2. As to traditional authority, the usage of good writers, which is the jus et norms loquendi, is altogether in favor of Knights Templars and not Knights Templar. In addition to the very numerous authorities collected by Brother Stansbury from the shelves of the Congressional Library, Dr. Mackey collated all the authorities in his own library. All the English and American writers, Masonic and unmasonic, except some recent American ones, use the plural of Templar to designate more than one knight. In a few instances, Dr. Mackey found Knight Templars, but never Knights Templar. The very recent American use of this latter phrase is derived from the authority of the present Constitution of the Grand Encampment of the United States, and is therefore the very point in controversy. The former Constitution used the phrase Knights Templars. On the whole, Dr. Mackey concludes, I am satisfied that the expression Knights Templar is a violation both of the grammatical laws of our language and of the usage of our best writers on both sides of the Atlantic. And it should therefore, I think, be abandoned. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.